Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you. Do you need permission to be human? You got it. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them.
I am super excited to talk about sisterhood, which is one of my favorite topics and just things in life.
Yes, for sure. Me too. And when we say sisterhood, in our case, we are meaning chosen sisters. I don't have any sisters.
I don't have any sisters.
Right. But Janelle and I have chosen each other as our sister. And I would say for most of my life, I called my friends friends. I didn't use that word sisterhood very lightly, but I think we have entered into a sisterhood. Would you say that's true?
I definitely say that's true. And I think that there has been an awakening or like greater awareness around the term sisterhood recently.
Okay. Tell me more.
I feel like I hear people say like soul sister, sisterhood, like there's like courses, like there's all sorts of things available to people. One of our favorite podcasts, We Can Do Hard Things, Glennon Doyle, Abby Wambach, and Amanda all talk about how like sisterhood and friendship is really challenging to them. So I think they use the words interchangeably.
That's true. And we feel like friendship and sisterhood comes fairly natural to us. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we started, what influences on friendship we had growing up, how we became friends and sisters, and offer some tips and insight. And
I would say that we offer an expanded view of sisterhood.
Yeah.
So that we have our own twist on the capacity of what we hold for one another. So that's leaving you in suspense for the moment.
Yeah. There'll be something a little edgy coming along. So let's talk a little bit about what our idea of friendship was growing up.
Sisterhood and female friendships have been an integral, defining part of my entire life ever since my very first friend when I was like 3. And there have been different women who have been really important to me. It's not just one person. And yet each one of them at the time was still like the most important person to me and impacted who I've become today. And the influence of that subconsciously was my mom, who she passed away 15 years ago. And I still remember at her funeral, there were several women who stood up and said, Phyllis was my best friend. And for me, that was a testament to how my mom made people feel like that they were the most important person. And I think I have some trace of that in me.
I've always had good friends. I've always had high trust of women. And definitely, I feel like my friends have been my sisters really for a long time. My mom was my best friend growing up. And then I had a variety of friends over the years that have helped me evolve. And they were always changing, right? People said, you'll have the same, some people have the same friends their whole life. And I had a birthday party when I was 42. And it was beautiful. I had all these women and I said a small poem about each of them. And it was lovely. And
they were all from different parts of your life, right? Like they didn't know each other necessarily.
And so some of them knew each other, but I really had a very defined one-on-one relationship with all of them. I'm not someone who goes out in this 5 or 6 women and gaggle. Like I have very dedicated one-on-one intimate relationships with my women friends. And my earliest influence was also my mom. She was just totally, that's the one thing I remember her doing if she wasn't with us, is she was on the phone talking to her friends. And she had a card club that went for 40 years. And she was the one who would bring the chicken noodle casserole to the house when someone's dad died. And She was the one that sent the card and remembered the birthdays. And just, yeah, she was very dedicated. And I saw that and I was like, oh, that's so important. I can't wait to have card club friends when I grow.
And I think that that's one of the traits that I have also experienced is I think also partly because I was single for so long, that I could go to all the weddings, I could go to all the baby showers, and I could also do all the fun vacations that we were doing as a group.
Right. And I think it's gotten harder over the years. My mom lives in the same town where she grew up, and all of her friends, most of her friends do too. Now my friends are pretty close by, but I know even if we're far apart, you know, you and I last year, the year before Costa Rica, did not see each other in person very much. We were mostly on Zoom.
I want to come back to your 40th birthday party because I know the story and I love it so much, which is that you were in this circle with all these women. You read a note to each of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It felt really big. And the strange thing is that now, 7 years later, my best friends weren't at that party. And so things change, right? And I didn't have a falling out with anyone. It's just that my life shifted and other lives shifted. Mm-hmm. So
something else I wanted to bring up, because I think it's at the core of why you and I believe in sisterhood, is that when you said, I trust women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. And it's not that I don't trust men. I do, I think, have an inherent trust in women. And some women don't, right?
Yes.
They're just not attracted to other women. Like, I feel like speaks to like in my case. This is part of why I've been able to create friendships and keep them.
Yeah. I'm not gonna say I've studied this, but I've had several conversations with women who don't have a lot of good friendships, and their friendship with me is in a way sometimes in a little bit of an anomaly. And because they have been hurt by women in the past, I can't say I've ever had like my trust betrayed by a woman. And I know that that's like a really fortunate position to be in.
I also know women who they didn't have a trust broken by another woman. They're just more attracted to men. They like hanging out with men.
Okay. Interesting. Like the more, when you say attracted, like just like more comfortable. I have a sense that some women would like to have strong women friendship. So I think that that's what we want to speak to today. We can just share a little bit of our experience of how it's worked for us. All right, so shall we talk about how we met?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Andrea and I already had been work colleagues when we figured out we had some of the same clients, but then we figured out serendipitously that we were both in non-monogamous marriages. And once we figured that out, we never stopped talking.
Yes.
And here we are, starting a podcast all these years later. But like shortly after that discovery, we ended up in a situation where a threesome was available to us with Andrea and with my husband. And she came over to my place, and it was one of those things where I still remember you saying, should we have boundaries?
We are good friends at this point.
And I was like, that seems like such a good idea, and I don't feel like we need them.
Right. And we didn't make any, and it was a great threesome.
It was a great threesome. And
it was a milestone for Janelle.
It was. It was actually like, in lots of ways, like one of the more impactful moments of my life, because I've been in threesomes before, but this was a threesome where I was with a sister. And we laughed. My energy was so amplified. I was so comfortable
and relaxed
and trusting.
Yeah.
And so, so for me as like the center part, like I had all of these like needs met and was able to feel myself in essentially just like this like joy, play, fun, laughter. And I recognized that up until that point, I think I had been really afraid of being, this is like my transition into poly, from non-monogamy to poly,
right?
Was because realizing, oh, if I love the woman who I am playing with, then I actually have way more fun. Because the trust is there, the relaxation. It freed me from society's boundaries of like, oh, you can't be sexual with a girlfriend that you love. And I feel so free in allowing sexuality to be on the table so that when it feels right and emergent, that we can access it. You and I would not say we have a sexual relationship by default at all.
No, but we have blurred boundaries. And so we have taken a bath together and read poetry to each other.
Yes.
Slept naked and spooned.
Right.
Made out occasionally. This connects us. It's fun. It's full of pleasure. But we take it very light.
And it's not every single time. It's just like what feels alive
Once in a
the
while.
moment.
Yeah.
And sometimes like what's way more alive is recording a podcast these days. Yeah. And so for me, the freedom is there's just like a real natural, authentic comfort in my body to know that I can be myself with you fully.
Beautiful. Yeah. And of course, I feel that way as well. It is pretty taboo, right, to do this with a friend. And I think this is just another example, along with polyamory, of something where we're like, oh, well, who says that we can't kiss? Who says that we can't be intimate with each other in bed and also be best friends? And, this was just us like pushing out our boundaries and saying, we don't need to live in this box.
Right. Because what we were doing is we were just following what felt good
And authentic for us.
Yes.
No force.
Right.
And it's just brought us closer.
Right. What the threesome did was allowed a greater intimacy and trust in life as friends that has catalyzed the creative everything that we're doing with our lives right now.
Yeah. The other part about the threesome is that you trusted me not to go after your husband. Right? Clearly, that would have been an opportunity if he and I clicked or we had some chemistry. And it also helps knowing that, like, I'm not going to be with your husband, right? That helps the ease of the threesome. Also, he's not going to go after me because it's too close, right? So there's also that ease, do you think?
Yes. And that, I think
Didn't
that's
occur
probably
to
true,
you?
but I'm not to say it didn't occur to me at the time. So really the big piece, like milestone for me in our threesome was realizing that I now desired to be emotionally connected to the people that I was sexually intimate with. Prior to that moment, that was not, because it felt like a threat. And then I realized actually having a sisterhood connection was calming, relaxing, and trusting for my nervous system.
Got it. So from that moment on, then after we discovered each other was poly, and then we had the threesome, which obviously intimately connected us. And that's why we call each other friends with benefits, even though we are not actually romantically connected all of the time. We spend a ton of time together. But if you looked at us, you wouldn't say we had a romantic relationship. So we're going to offer some advice on being a good friend and what expanded sisterhood looks like. And I think one thing it starts with is an app, right? So this app, it's another app you can get on your phone. This one's called Voxer. And
it's a walkie-talkie app.
Yeah, some of you may be familiar with it. And you can basically leave these long messages, hit something, and you can leave a message while you're walking around the house, doing the dishes, in the car, and you can leave a 14-minute message. So we started leaving each other these long boxes. And there's two benefits here, though. One is that you get to talk it all out, get all the stuff out. We were crying, we were laughing, and you can also speed up the play, right? So you can go 3 times, 2 times, 1 time. And that helps. It gave us an outlet for all of these things we needed to say. And then the other benefit is that after I would leave a message, I would play it back for myself. Somehow this presents an incredibly valuable perspective on what you're saying. I was talking about what my husband was allegedly feeling instead of what I was feeling, for example. And this was very telling.
Yeah. So this was a use in terms of friendship, in terms of deeply connected. The app provided an opportunity to give our daily updates.
Yes.
In a way that was not intrusive because it wasn't a phone call.
Right. It accommodated our schedules.
Yep. And then had this added benefit of, and again, this is for out loud processors, that we got to listen to ourselves like what we said. And like that's how I was learning by speaking and then learning by listening to myself. And then also the added benefit of you reflecting back to me and vice versa, what we heard each other say.
Exactly. And when I talk about the sisterhood point of this is that sometimes I don't need her to respond. Sometimes I just need to talk and I need her to type back, I hear you. I'm so sorry. I'm holding you. I love you. Right? I don't need like all this advice. I just need someone to witness me being sad or witness me being frustrated.
Or in your joy. I have another friend, we say it's like the top 5% or your bottom 5%. Bottom 5%, right? Like you could like someone who's there with you.
Yes, no matter what. Yeah. And the great thing was that if I was going through this at midnight and she wasn't around, I could just leave this long box and then she would answer me in the morning. So then that gets into how we want to talk about being a good friend. And I think so much of our life, we're taught to give advice, right? We hear something and then here's our opinion. Sometimes people are seeking advice. But what I have learned really best through being friends with you. I mean, I have been a good listener in the past, but I think I have also bent to offer advice. I think I rush to fix things, right? I want to find a solution.
So I think, I think the attribute of wanting to fix, right, is coming from a place of love.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. But what we found works better is a reflection. So it's reflecting back what I'm saying, and it's also synthesizing everything she heard across a 10-minute story. And so in this way, she's reflecting back to me, but she's not telling me what to do. She's just saying, look, here's what I'm hearing. And here's what I heard from you last week. And also I heard you say this last month, BTW.
Right. Yes. Right. There is this thread of, and maybe one of the benefits is, I can track the storyline over time and say, okay, this is what you're feeling last week. Is it still true that you're feeling this right now? Right. And it doesn't matter, right? You can change your mind or not, but just like, are you sure?
And I find that is the best kind of response, right? Is it's a reflection. And sometimes Janelle will say, and I've learned this from her, like, do you want a reflection? Like, so she asks permission to see if I want a reflection back. Now I don't think I've ever said no, but it's nice to say, okay, do I want a reflection or did I just need to bleh? So I think that's a nice habit to get into.
And I would also say, we're talking about this in the context of sisterhood. I actually learned these skills from my partner who had done a lot of, like when he and I first started together, like I come from a family that like, I would say does not listen, talks over one another. And I remember I used to get really defensive about my communication style. And he was like, why are you so defensive? And I'd be like, it's just how I am. And he was like, you are so curious and capable of learning 1,000 things. Why do you say you cannot learn a new communication style? And it took me a long time to understand that I could, right? I read the nonviolent communication and then I started doing this reflecting, like this was not innate in my upbringing, how I speak to you as a friend now. This is all learned skills.
Okay, so a couple of nuances here though. Great. You're saying this is what you learned.
How to listen is what I learned.
So it's really about master listening skills. We're talking about being quiet after someone finishes, maybe for a full minute, maybe 2 minutes. It will seem like an eternity, let me tell you, because I so want to talk, but waiting to see if any more comes out.
Yeah, especially if you're talking to a man, actually. I mean, we could get into the Queen's Code and Alison Armstrong, but like this is where I learned that. But yeah. For you and I, as extroverts who talk a lot, I have learned to listen.
Great. So me too. Something else I want to speak to is that we also have a volley style. And I actually feel this like defensiveness rise up in me where I'm just like, fuck you. I have a volley style and so do you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That works for us. And I enjoy that and it gives me energy. Now, can you do a volley style with everyone? I'm not sure. Like not everyone will handle it. My husband definitely doesn't prefer it.
Right. And nor does mine. But I would also, where I'm going to push back a little bit is that I think that I can do a volley style with you and I'm still a better listener than I would have been 10 years ago. Yeah. So I think interrupting to give advice when actually advice may not be what's desired, right? Like, so these are like volley back and forth if we're on the same page, great. But volley interrupting so I can tell you something when you haven't completed it, I think that's where just really our differences are.
And so let's talk about interruptions for a second. I tend to be really curious and I have lots of questions. And that's overall it can be a good thing. I want to know. My husband says that I sound like a detective.
And people say, right? Like get people talking about themselves is like,
if in doubt, ask people questions about themselves, right? So I get it. It can be a bit much. And what I've learned too is that it's okay to ask questions, but if someone is in the flow of a story and it's a long story and you can see them being animated and they're having fun on the ups and downs of it, stopping them to ask the color of the car is not a good idea, right? And I'm so detail oriented, I want to know all the details. Feels like a love move, and I do love them, but it's a little bit selfish, actually.
One of the other things I value in sisterhood is the honesty for you to call me out, right? That I am counting on you when I start to say, oh, my husband feels, that you're like, no. How do you feel? Bring it back to you. There's many examples of how you have called me back with love, but with like, is that really what you're thinking? Or is it really his fault? Or is it something you need to look at yourself more? Right? I mean, so in this way, in this case, we're talking about our partners, right? That's often what we are talking about anyway, but that we are really holding each other accountable for our highest good.
Well said. I think another example of this calling out too is when you know that your friend is writing a script that is actually fake, right? It's a story they're creating.
Yeah. Can you talk about scripts?
Right. So let's say, you don't know what's going on with he's out, and in our polyamorous relationships, we don't know what our husband's doing, right? He's out with a date and we're thinking, oh my gosh, I bet they're falling in love. They're probably going back to their house right now, having sex, having the super soul connection. Are they taking medicine? I'm not there. I don't get to do it. What the fuck? And you're just creating this whole life for someone else, right? You're writing their whole night. You're writing their weekend. And I got to tell you, I don't think they would appreciate you doing that for them, right? That was the ultimate. I'm just like, no, they don't want you to write their script for you. They're writing their own script. And the script that you're writing is in no way helpful to you. So we're getting into other topics, but that is another thing we call each other out on.
So we're talking about high quality sisterhood, not I'm going to talk to someone every other month or year.
Yes, when you're talking to someone daily or a few days a week.
Yeah.
So another thing that we hear besides a reflection, right, as opposed to advice, is questions, right? So what you say to me is, I'm curious, how would you feel if you left for the day? How would you feel if this happened? Right? So if you can come back with questions, then it's putting the question back to them and helping them reveal their own truth instead of you telling them what their truth is.
Right.
That is the ultimate good friend quality.
I would say for women who maybe have struggled with, as we've talked about, we're living our whole lives trying to expand out of the social and cultural conditioning of what is a woman supposed to do and be and all of these things, that helping someone find their truth and embrace it and support it, regardless of what actually my opinion is or what society's opinion is the biggest act of love and service I can give to you.
And I call this, when I get it from you, I call this radical acceptance. And this is also a little bit about how about our reactions. So I'm an incredibly reactionary. All my feelings show on my face to just a bit of an exaggerated degree. It's a little bit of a disability, I would say. But it is like I'm very expressive. And I have sat many times telling you some terrible, toxic, shocking things. And she's not say, oh my God, she just continues to smile and look at me. I don't really know how she does it. I advise you to do this. I don't know how, but she does. So it's possible, I'm telling you. And the more you can do that, the better, right? Because
I mean, ultimately, we're just judging ourselves. And so my goal and your goal to me as my friend and me as your friend is to not add to the cascade of judgment that's already all around us. Okay, so you may be wondering, with everything that we just shared, you might be like, this is impossible for me. I don't have any women who I can do this with. I can be authentic or vulnerable or sharing with. It could be too much of a risk. I mean, we get that. So to just give you an idea of something else that's possible is there is something called women's circles. This isn't like, it's not like one group that has this trademarked or anything, but I went to like a women's conference 5 years ago now. And just so happened that the 5 women who were at the table that I sat at on the very first night, we started a women's group. We're from all over the world, Finland, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and Denver. And we have gotten together once a month for 2 hours on Zoom for the past 4.5 years.
yeah, that's amazing.
And while I have this type of conversation, this vulnerable, authentic, real, spiritual conversation every day, all day, pretty much whoever I'm talking about, for most of the other 4 women on my circle, like this is the only time in a month where they get to do this. So is there a way, and you can like, these can be paid, you can find like a topic, you know, like there's different, they can be paid circles. Just maybe do your research and see. They don't have to be in person. They can be on Zoom, but maybe you can find one in person if you prefer. So these are women that I've only met twice in person over my lifetime. And we are so deeply connected. We're of every decade, 30, 40, 50, 60. And it's nourishing. It's supportive. They are rocks. I have other women in sisterhood, but they are part of that. And so it can look a lot of different ways.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think a good way to tap into one of these women's circles is going to a women's retreat for a weekend. And then you get access to other people who are also interested in spiritual awakening and creating bonds with other women, in having someone to talk to, not every day, not updating them on your daily activities, but once a month as a touch base, right?
And if you happen to be interested in poly specifically, you know, Angie and I have the poly circles for women that we host on Zoom.
And I think in our stage of life, I've heard some women say that it's like, how am I going to meet someone now, right? Like, where's my heart? What do I harvest these friends when all I'm hanging out with is, you know, my daughter's friends' parents because we're all at the game together, or my neighbors because they're in close proximity. And I feel like when you see someone who you feel like occasionally you might run into someone who you have an unusual connection with, just, you know, at a random get together, at a party, through a friend. And I feel like there's an internal litmus test that I go through, not really even consciously, where I want to go out with people who are not ball hogs, right? They're not talking about themselves the entire time. They're asking me questions about my life. Like, that's really critical, that there is some kind of awareness of balance about who gets to talk and share their issues. And I would say, you know, it should really be it's the same advice I would give a 13-year-old. It's, don't worry about who likes you. Seek out who you like. Right. And that's such a basic, I know it's a basic advice. I don't mean to sound condescending, but that happens to me too. It's like, no, who do I like to hang out with? Who brings me ease? Who looks me in the eye when they're talking to me? Who respects my time schedule? Who gets back to me right away? Right? Who likes the same things I like? Who gives me a hug? There are people who are more attuned to this than others. And you get a little bit of a radar about it the more that you look for it.
You mentioned something earlier about the idea of a group of girlfriends getting together and drinking wine, right? Which
yes,
is
so
definitely
common.
something that I did for a really, really, really long time. And I would say, as we both have shared, since 40 and above, both of us, just so you know it's possible, both of us have a whole new group of friends. And I would say that the drinking, I have also really reduced the amount of drinking that I've done during this time of my life. And I'm not saying there's a correlation, but for me, drinking was numbing. I also had a lot of fun, but it was really numbing of these emotions that I have now tapped into. So that might be something else to explore. Obviously, like a women's circle or whatever. If alcohol is not involved, then there's just another layer of vulnerability that's accessible.
I would agree. That's also been my experience. I just less interested in alcohol, and I think end up with deeper connections because of it. And I also think, as I mentioned, one-on-one coffee is so much better than this group of 6 women who are like talking over each other and like basically sometimes just having what I call like everyone just has their soliloquy, right? They just stand up and like tell their whole story. And then someone stands up and they tell their whole story. And there's not really an exchange. Sometimes there is. It depends on the people, certainly. We get caught up in just talking to talk to like get our 2 cents in. And then there's
talking to talk. Let's pause that. Like back to bring it full circle to the start of the conversation in terms of listening skills is when are you talking to talk? When am I talking to talk? And like bringing that awareness to myself was pretty significant. All right. Well, sister, I love you.
Yeah, I love you too. Mwah. That's our thoughts on sisterhood.
Please take the time on whatever platform you're listening to rate and review or rant, whichever you prefer. And we look forward to seeing you next time.